Thank you everyone for joining us. Everyone's just coming into the room now. So lovely to see your faces. Really appreciate it. We're looking forward to a terrific discussion today. And we've got a really great panel. So let's get started more officially, shall we, as everyone comes into the room. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Shrivell. Welcome to our SpinProof live Zoom panel. We'll be presenting this live Zoom panel on the first Friday of every month, featuring various commentators and experts. And thanks to Australia at Home for hosting us. I'd like to acknowledge the unceded Camaragal land I'm speaking with you from. Today we'll hear from a terrific panel where each will share the issues which have been on their radars during what's been yet another extraordinary week in Australian politics. I'm sure there won't be a huge surprise of what the main focus will be this week. Joining us are Tala Lambert, Editor-in-Chief of Women's Agenda, Con, Founder and CEO of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, Em Hassar, former Member of Federal Parliament, and Carrick Ryan, Auspol blogger and social media commentator. Welcome to you all. A little bit of housekeeping. Please share your views in the chat. Add any questions to the question room. We've got a bit to get through today, but we'll try to get to some of your questions in the next hour. And I'll just say that some of the content today might raise some concerns for some of you. So we'll be adding support numbers into the chat room. First, I'm going to come to each of the panellists and ask them for their views on the events of the week, and then we'll all consider a key issue. We can't possibly hope to get through the many complexities and nuances we've all seen in the public arena in the last weeks, but we'll certainly cover a lot. Tala, if I can perhaps come to you first. I know you've got your baby with you and you've
a ticking time bomb.
A ticking time, exactly, and we've been told that the baby will last as long as the blueberries last. So I thought we'd come to you first. Tala Lambert from Women's Agenda. You've of course been keeping a very close eye on events of the last few weeks, so wonderful to have your views today.
Yeah, look, I mean, it has certainly been an earth-shattering week in Australian politics, and I mean, it seems like every week at the moment is bigger than the last, and not in a positive way at all. And look, I think what has come to light is incredibly illuminating, and how the government is treating it at the moment is really distressing. I think, it took several days for Christian Porter to come out and reveal himself as the minister at the centre of these allegations. And throughout that period, we heard Scott Morrison repeatedly try to quash what was going on. And, even when we knew that it was inevitable that this minister was going to have to come forward, that Porter was going to have to come forward, Morrison holding to that line that Porter had fiercely rejected the accusations against him, and that held enough water for the Prime Minister to seemingly let this all go and hope that it just gets swept under the carpet. And I think that's really disappointing, given the words and the promises that he gave to women just a few days prior to that. At an International Women's Day address, Scott Morrison spoke about respecting women, protecting them, and reflecting on what that culture is. And then, and that was in light of Brittany Higgins' horrible allegations, and also the other 4 women that had come forward and said that same staffer had sexually assaulted them. And I think in his conduct and his response to Porter, all he has shown is that they were hollow words and hollow promises. And I wrote in a piece this week that, it is far from case closed in terms of Porter's, I guess, rejection of the claims. He wants it all to go away. He's saying he's going to take 2 weeks of mental health leave for himself and then come back into the Attorney General role. But that's not good enough for women of this country, and I suspect thousands of men as well. We want answers, and an independent inquiry is the only way to get that now. We know that the legal avenue is no longer able to be pursued, at least in New South Wales. And I'm pleased that the South Australia coroner is still looking at it. But it's a horrifying situation, and women want answers, and that's why there's this rally that's moving ahead in Canberra on the 15th of March. And I really do feel like it's a really pivotal moment in time for women calling time on this long history of destructive and toxic behaviour towards them, and especially in our parliament.
It does feel like change is in the air. I've felt that before. Sometimes I wonder whether I'm thinking that with my head or my heart. But seeing the rise and the speed with which that rally or the march that you mentioned in Canberra, they've got under 20,000 people on their Facebook page in about 3 or 4 days. I'm currently travelling to Canberra. I'm hoping that this is a time for change. I think people have had enough.
I will see you there, Denise. No, look, I think that that's exactly the case. And I can tell you that the Women's Agenda inbox has been absolutely flooded this week from inquiries from women that are just outraged by what's going on and just feel so livid with the government's response to this. And I really think that Scott Morrison had this unique opportunity to use this as a catalyst for change and to really put his money where his mouth is when it comes to women. If he is holding to these claims and holding to these promises and slogans and words, then that was the real opportunity for him to show some leadership and some courage. And instead, he's done exactly what he always does. He's attempted to sweep it under the rug. But unfortunately for the Prime Minister, as good as he is at PR and marketing, I really don't feel that this is one of the cases that's just going to go away lightly for him.
I agree. And Carl in the chat, Carl Stevens, thank you, is reminding me that it's not just, these marches aren't just in Canberra. They're also in other cities on the 14th and 15th of March. Yes, I think it's going to be a really massive day. And yes, Tala, I will certainly see you there. Let me move to you now, Con, founder and CEO of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. And Con, so happy to have you here with us. I see your tweets and your posts and so on, and really admire the work that you've done for a long time. So thank you so much for joining us today. You've certainly had a very busy week, and there's been much talk about the rule of law this week, and I've certainly seen you comment a lot about that on Twitter. What comments do you have?
Yeah, at a time, the rule of law is precious. It's the foundation of a democratic country. But on the same day that Christian Porter was talking about how the rule of law must be protected and a fair hearing must be protected at all times, the same man was trying to pass a law that would allow refugees to have their visas cancelled, their citizenship cancelled, and the ability for them to be deported using secret evidence that they would have no right to see, to contest, or even have a hearing. And in the same day that Peter Dutton's talking about the importance of the rule of law, he's trying to pass 4 different laws that take away from refugees the right to access the courts, the right to a fair hearing. The rule of law exists for white privileged men, and it doesn't really exist beyond that. But a deeper thing, what this week has been so devastating has been for survivors. All of us know many survivors in our lives, and to see the lack of political leadership, to see the misogyny and sexism that runs rife in this government, to see a Prime Minister so tone deaf that in the highest office in the land, whilst Christian Porter has a right to a presumption of innocence, so does the alleged victim a right to be heard. And how can we have faith in the integrity of that office if we have a Prime Minister that sat there and said, I didn't even bother reading the letter of allegations? What that sends to women in this country is that you don't matter. And his comments towards Brittany Higgins was just a further example of just how out of touch he is around this idea of, I talk to my wife and what if they were my daughters? When do we get to a point where we have political leadership in this country that says that women matter, not because of the relationship to the men in their lives, but because they're somebody, and that women have the same right to agency and safety? We have an epidemic of male violence in this country, and really the spotlight and conversation needs to be on men around how our prominent male leaders, men from political office to community figures to men in the media, how are we going to use our platform to start tackling what we've got here, which is a men's problem, which is male entitlement, sexism and misogyny, the way we're raising our boys to be entitled to women's bodies, to take no to mean yes. I mean, this is at the heart of this. And what Scott Morrison is just representing is a broader issue of a failure of our society to grapple the fact that we have a culture that promotes a rape culture, that promotes an epidemic of violence against women. And what Scott Morrison is doing, instead of leading from the front and showing a positive example of male leadership for this country, he's clearly part of the problem, as is Porter, as is Dutton. And I think it's just been a shameful and disgraceful week to see how bereft they are of leadership. I'll stop there, and also just want to say I'm coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people, and just to pay my respects. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Con. I'll just comment too. I think we saw the Defence Force Chief come out with some certain instructions for for their cadets, which really picked up on what Con said. Telling cadets, don't make yourself attractive and things like that. So again, the emphasis has been on, women instead of the men. It really has been a really, confusing week about where the messages should actually be directed to say the least. But again, we're seeing this rise and these discussions and these protests really starting to pop up as a reaction to all of this. Hopefully we're at an inflection point, but I also absolutely agree, Con, it has been shameful and very upsetting to see the way that the government has reacted to this. I do wonder whether their one-seat majority has played a massive role in this. They have to put that, they've had to put that political lens on top of it, because if they lose one more member, then it really is difficult for them, to say the least, in the lower house. So a point there. That doesn't excuse that they shouldn't be addressing these issues as well, but that might be in some way in their thinking. Emma Hassar, let me come to you, and thank you again, Con. But Emma, first of all, I just want to quickly say with Emma and I will be doing a podcast in 2 weeks where we'll be speaking more directly about her experiences, because of course she's had a lot to say, certainly on Twitter and through some other avenues. But today Emma is going to talk about the culture, particularly in Parliament, which have obviously brought around many of the issues that we've seen happening in the past week. So over to you, Emma, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to say good morning, because in my time zone on Whadjuk land, it is only 9:15. So good morning from where I am, and good afternoon to where you are. Denise, I want to make a point that that Con talked about, which said, this is a man's problem. I was called into upwards of a dozen interviews last week to speak about my experience. And then, of course, we heard the very powerful press club address by Grace Tame saying, stop talking to survivors, stop asking us, this is not our issue. And I think that you highlighted one of the things that's really problematic, and we talk about the toxic culture of Canberra, and that is because they are all bystanders. Every single one of them, behind closed doors, spoke privately about the ordeal that I was subjected to, and not one of them was able to use their platform or their position to defend or to discourage that kind of behaviour. Denise, something that, that was also spoken about there, where we had the Defence Force Chief telling cadets not to be prey. We've also seen the private schools send out enormous emails to parents saying, tell your girls about what to wear and not what to drink and whatever. In my experience, it doesn't matter. It actually has no effect on the vulnerability that we still have and the vulnerabilities that we face. Because let me tell you, my behaviour in Canberra was above board. I wasn't a drinker down there. I didn't go out every night. I was always home early. I was always in the company of extra people. I was never in a position where I was alone. And those things that happened to me still happened. So it doesn't matter what our behaviour or how we modify our behaviour, we are still vulnerable to men's toxic behaviour. I think I saw Hugh Remington last night on the project talking about and really calling it out. And it's really the first time I've heard someone in that position, a man, not mincing his words after the address by Porter in that speech that he gave. you know, addressing the media immediately after, I think Andrew Probyn said, "Oh, that's a shattered man." And I think it was at that point I was just incandescent with even more rage. I didn't think I could get any more angry about what was going on. And he was like, "Oh, that's a shattered man." And I'm like, I'm sorry, but no. And for me, Christian Porter and the entire scenario that we are faced with now is, if you are innocent, you behave like an innocent person. And certainly when I was the subject of rumour and innuendo and unfounded allegations and all of those things, I said, come at me. I will have fair work. I will have IP. I will have all of it. You can look at me with the scrutiny of the letter of the law and then tell me exactly what it is that you think that I've done wrong. And of course, I wasn't afforded that. I was given no due process. I was not given any kind of legal or statutory laws. It was all, you know, made up as they went along by the Labor Party, which, you know, we'll speak about next week, I'm sure, Denise. But I was happy to subject myself and submit to that process because I had absolutely no qualms at all saying that I was innocent. So if I was in Christian Porter's shoes, which I was, proclaiming and protesting my innocence, I would be saying, coroner, please investigate this woman's death. Please look at the events surrounding it. I would be going back to New South Wales Police. I mean, he was up there decrying his innocence and said, "Oh, I haven't even read the allegations that are presented to me." Well, what are you saying that you didn't do then? Like, if you've only heard a rumour and you've not bothered to read it. And then, of course, you know, it was this, you know, flippant kind of, I remember this, but I don't remember that. It was a long time ago, but remembers ironing, remembers dancing, and remembers a bowl of prawns. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's all coming back to you now. So that's my concern about this process. And also, you know, I don't think Morrison has just missed the boat in terms of being able to be on the right side of history. I also think that the Labor Party are missing their massive opportunity to be on the right side of history. Anybody who is sitting anywhere in this country right now that thinks that this is not endemic on both sides of the house or even the entirety of that house probably also believes in the tooth fairy. I'm sorry to the tooth fairy, but they also probably believe in Santa as well. So it is rife throughout that building, and it goes back to that toxic misogynistic culture where the political cover-ups, and it's about power before safety. It's about power before anything else. And it is time that we get on the right side of history. And I think that, you know, we've seen these events where, you know, this has really come to a head in times past, you know, and then it sort of dissipates. But I get this sense from my friends and journalists in the media that are saying, no, this is not going away. We've now sort of got this critical mass of journalists who are female who have actually been subjected to some of this behaviour that they're hearing about from MPs and from staff within the House, where they say, okay, well, now actually the Fourth Estate's going to take this over and we're going to start working towards changing this culture once and for all. And I think that you know, we've had lots of women advocates come through before. We've had plenty of examples, Rosie Batty, Hannah Clark, Grace Tame, where these powerful, extraordinary women have paid ultimate prices for various things. And it shouldn't need to take those events for these things to change.
I absolutely agree. And I'm sure most of you saw Grace Tame's address at the National Press Club during the week, which was quite extraordinary. She made some extremely strong points. It was really great to see. I'll also echo what you said about Hugh Remington's piece on the project last night. I watched it on Twitter. I couldn't see it live last night, but please, if you haven't seen it, go and have a look. But he really makes the point that most of when we're talking about taking these cases to the police, most of these cases are taken to the police and very rarely are found, you know, very rarely are the women sort of found, you know, do the women get justice, I suppose. And we'll also echo something that you said, Emma, about the media. I think we've seen some really terrific reporting, certainly from a lot of very strong women journalists in the last 3 or 4 weeks. It really has been great. So thank you, and we'll come back to you in a moment. And yes, looking forward to our podcast in a couple of weeks. Carrick Ryan, let me come to you. And for those that aren't aware of Carrick, Carrick, of course, has a very large following on Facebook where they talk about a huge range of issues, a very large and engaged audience. Encourage those of you who are on Facebook to go and find Carrick. Carrick, your views of the week.
Well, I just wanted to touch on a few things that everyone else has said so far, and everyone's been 100% accurate. Even just what Emma said then about the sort of the female journalists, I do wonder internally whether if this issue was raised 20 years ago, we sort of got a vision into the way that even really great journalists like Peter Van Onselen and to a lesser extent Chris Ullman, they almost sort of sided with Christian Porter in the first instance. These are men that they know, they're almost part of that boys' club. I wonder if we didn't have Samantha Maiden and all these amazing, as I said, there's this handful of about 5 or 6 really experienced, distinguished and authorities now in the Canberra Press Gallery that have taken control of this issue and led it. I do wonder whether that would have been the same. So that's probably a positive out of this, the fact that we've had that agency, that they had a voice through the females in the media in that instance. I think what's been most palatable, coming from a law enforcement background, is that absolute, the unpalatableness of unknowing, the fact that we, due to the nature of the offence and the historic nature of the offence, there's so little corroborative evidence. So as what normally happens in these circumstances, we're left to really rely on his word versus her word. And for so many of us, we rely on that lived experience. And there's so many Australians right now that understand the statistics around how extremely rare it is when a woman ever makes a false rape claim. And we also have so much circumstantial evidence around Christian Porter, his character, his past experience and his past behaviour. So we're left in that really sort of uncomfortable situation where we're left to really just listen to it and make a decision, do we believe it or not? This whole reliance on the rule of law, the notion of the rule of law, is a complete false equivalence. That comes down to a criminal investigation with a really high criminal threshold, and that dictates whether someone gets locked away in prison or not. That's not the circumstances that people are asking for in this instance. They really just want to know, at least they want to know, they want to be informed, because ultimately all we have left is that democratic voice, that we're all sitting here and every single person in Australia is going, did he do it? Is he a rapist? And a lot of people that know with strong conviction. So we need to know all the facts. We need to know everything available to us. And unfortunately, this is probably one of the least transparent governments in our history. So the idea that we're actually going to be privy to all the facts so the electorate can make an informed choice, we just don't have a great deal of hope for that.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there has been a lot of commentary around, well, you know, wouldn't you want an investigation? Why aren't you agreeing to an investigation? Surely surely you want that to clear your name and to get all the issues on the table and so on. So that's certainly a question that's sticking in my mind. I just want to point to something that Mira has said in the chat. For us of the older generation, this is so encouraging, watching young women speaking out. So it's, it really does feel like younger people, look, older people as well. This is, our time to get these issues out there. It feels like, again, there's huge momentum increasingly behind that. Hopefully it will lead to change with this government. Of course, anyone who follows this government, that's going to be very difficult, but it also shows, I think, that, people are waking up at last, which probably brings me, and I think we've lost, Tala's still there. How are the blueberries going, Tala? Oh, unmute.
Yes, the blueberries held up for a little while and then we moved on to the sushi, but we're okay. Sorry, what was the question, Denise?
Oh, I haven't asked you. I was just about to come to you. This is sort of the thing I want perhaps everyone to comment, and please, and thank you to everyone who's participating in the chat. It's wonderful to see your comments coming through. Doesn't want me to speak.
Perhaps, Denise, I'll take on what we had a chat yesterday in regarding to that possible movement that might come from this. And I think you and I were having a chat on Twitter about it in regards to the fact that one of the biggest demographic shifts against Trump from people that had previously voted for him and then turned against him in the second election were Republican women. So these were conservative women that might have agreed with a lot of Trump's policies, but ultimately were overcome with the misogyny and the fact that there were 26 credible rape allegations against him. Now, I personally am always cynical and perhaps the last couple of weeks to my detriment, quite cynical about whether this would have any effect. I unfortunately believe that Christian Porter will probably survive this. I think the Morrison government will survive this. Now, what I think needs to be done, or to try and make them pay an electoral price, is, and I absolutely accept the fact that this shouldn't be a women's issue. This needs to be a male issue and a societal issue. But I don't think that many LNP male voters who were watching Christian Porter will change their vote. I don't think that many of, there's not enough evidence for them to change from their lived experience to look at him and go, well, he's lying, he's a rapist. But I think there are enough women, conservative women that would otherwise vote for Morrison, that have, through their lived experience, dealt with people like Christian Porter, or they either are a survivor themselves or know survivors and understand their experience. And perhaps that will be enough to really carve off a bit of that voting demographic.
We will see. And I do note that, as I've had lots of questions on Twitter from men who want to get involved in these marches. And of course, the answer back to that is, this is so inclusive. Please, yes, we need you with us. So please have a look. I think on their Facebook page, it'll certainly be promoted on various social media channels. So blokes, please come along to the march on March the 15th as well. Con, what I often see when we're speaking about, this government, is that they seem, as as Carrick said, a little Teflon coated. There seems to be a huge lack of accountability. A lot of long-term political commentators and watchers have said they've never seen anything like it, a government that acts with such impunity. I think that, again, my heart is hoping that there's a shift. My head is still thinking, I've seen this before. The Women's March, again, gives me some hope. What will it take to get more Australians to see what we see, and to see, what I see as some quite stark dangers ahead of us?
Yeah, it's quite telling to see the fact that we now have such low expectations of those who politically lead us. Be a moral compass or moral leadership, that we've had decades now of politics that have beaten down both our own integrity, values, and imagination through the politics of demonization, division, and fear-mongering. I always see the treatment of refugees and First Nations people as the canary in the mine. The way in which we've been able to have successive governments convince us both to fear refugees and to fear a treaty. And then you look at that, and the ability to have a budget just a few months ago that had zero investment in women. And so what it tells me is they see that there are votes in focusing on self-interest and privilege, and that they will not hurt if they forget about women, if they forget about First Nations people, if they forget about people of color, if they forget about what they did during COVID. I think about how many people they left behind. So what it tells us about, well, how do we build better leadership? And we're not going to win this conversation based on facts. We've got the facts on our side. We've got the truth on our side. It's not cutting through. So we need to go back to a conversation about values. And what does it mean to actually live with values? What does it mean to live in a society that is actually equitable, in a society where women are actually safe, where there's a seat at the table for everyone, where we recognize our First Nations history, where we have a livable income and secure social housing for everyone? We're only going to shift there if we demand better from our political leaders. We can't just hand pass it all to them. And we know the Murdoch media has been so corrosive in the way in which it has spread misinformation. But when are we as a community going to demand better? And those conversations have to start at our kitchen tables, in our workplaces, at our pubs, where we start talking about the Australia we can be and we want to be, and that we stop voting in these bastards who care not for any of us. So we need to demand better, expect better, raise our kids better, call out this terrible failure of leadership. But at the end of the day, if we don't demand more, and if we don't start engaging those in our own lives, we've got to start somewhere. Every great social progress movement starts from people going, I've had enough, and we've got to change this. And it starts with every conversation and every action. When we look at this culture of violence against women, for the men watching and going, what can I do? Well, it's about, Emma talked about this before, about how rare is it to actually hear men use their platforms on Twitter, on Facebook, anywhere, in their workplaces, to actually speak up in solidarity with women. So where are we as men calling out the types of behavior and culture and values and the way in which we expect the women in our workplaces and in our lives to be treated? Where are we putting our voices? Women are exhausted in doing the heavy lifting and always having to call out behavior that is not theirs. So there's a real challenge here for men about when are we going to start taking some leadership, amplifying both the voices of women, but actually doing the hard work of raising better boys, of leading with better values, of demanding better from the men in our lives. How many of us as men, turn a blind eye when we see sexist jokes, when we see harassment, when we see abuse happening towards women? And how many of us are actually we all have an element of power in our lives to actually do something about this. So I think that's the challenge for us as men about how do we stop being the bystanders that Emma was talking about and actually start being the leaders of change? Because women have been grinding away at this for centuries and they're sick of it. And I think there's a real challenge. And we see this in the failure of the male leadership we have in this country as well. So something better has to replace it. And we've got to demand that and build that now, and can't get despondent and despair and go, it's all too hard. It all starts with the choices we make every day around the people we're going to be. And I know that at the ACC, we're 20 years now since we started here. And the challenge is always enormous in what we're fighting, but every day we see wins by leading with compassion and decency and love. And we've all got to keep starting there, because that's the only thing that's going to change. The sorry state of the leadership we have in this nation is demanding, leading, and building something better in its place.
That's wonderful, Con. I really echo that. I want to see more of that attitude taken into the voting box. And that's what concerns me. People are concerned about so many issues, but quite often then they don't vote based on those issues or based on those concerns. Again, this is our time. It has to happen. I see a few people in the chat commenting on the Getting Elected convention last week, which is talking about finding and electing community-minded independents. I think that's a really positive way. And indeed, the whole premise of that is, as you said, Con, getting people around the kitchen table, having conversations about what real representation looks like for us in Canberra, and also at other levels of government. So at council level, at state level, now is our time to do all of this. Have we lost Emma? I can't see her on the room anymore. Evan, who is helping us, we might have lost Emma.
No, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Very good. Sorry, I couldn't see you on my screen.
I did drop out very briefly. Look, I think Carrick and Con have raised some really exceptional points, and I think the problem is that we need a credible alternative. The Labor Party used to be a party of values, and we were really progressive. I think Gough Whitlam made the remarks a very, very long time ago now that they'd kind of started to inbreed a little bit, where we were just looking at giving positions of power to hacks and people who had been around a long time. Of course, I didn't have that background, which made me incredibly vulnerable. But there was an opportunity, there was an intersecting opportunity there for the leader of both those parties to do something. And obviously the Morrison government has no business. They don't care. They've shown us time and time again not a values-led government. But disappointingly, on the progressive side of politics, we've again heard a set of empty words where power, so of course, power has trumped over everything. And it's not so much about doing the right thing or doing the values-led thing. It's just about what's going to keep that person in that position of power at that moment. I think that something that we haven't talked about today, and why Canberra can be like that, is that we're so focused on a numbers game. We're so focused on, equal representation of women, and what people leave out of that conversation is the equal shared power. So we might be there, window dressing, we might be there, looking a bit more colourful and adding a bit more movement to the place, but there is not equal power sharing for the women and for the men in Canberra. And that's, that's an insider's take. That wouldn't be something that, is registering on the outside. It's not just about having a critical mass of women. It's not about just making sure that 50% of our positions are held by women, because of course lots of people know that deals are done in those back rooms and there's not enough women happening in those back back rooms because we don't have the institutional longevity in the processes to keep women back there where those decisions are made. So it's about an equal sharing of the power, and to make sure that our women that are going in there are armed. And I think I made this observation on Q&A last year, and the beautiful Jane Caro said, no, we need more women, because I was asked by a young woman in the audience, you know, should I go into politics? And of course, the answer for me at this stage is absolutely not. I would not put a woman in that position to be abused, to be violated, and to be absolutely railroaded in the same way that we've seen other women that have gone before me, until that place is cleaned up. And how does it get cleaned up? Well, the women have been there. We had more women in Parliament than we have ever had. And 2 of us in the same year sued for being slut-shamed in our workplaces. It doesn't matter how many of us that are there. It's about the men who are there sharing the power and taking the leadership on this issue, and stop being absolute bystanders in this culture that is allowed to just permeate through those corridors, because it is a structure that is designed by them and upheld by them. So until they're willing to just move over, share the stage, use their voice and their platform, then unfortunately we're in a situation where, you know, the anger of these women that are going to march and the men who are going to march with us is going to amount to zip if we don't have a credible alternative.
Emma, could I ask you a question? Pick your brain about how we could possibly change pre-selection, because I feel like that is a huge part of it, notwithstanding the possibility of creating a third party and just all that. And there's obviously some great independents that come through, but they rely on some sort of, not celebrity status, but people knowing who they are to get a movement behind them. How can we change it so that the people that are running for these seats aren't the same, faceless staffers that are going to continue to propagate that culture? How do we get fresh blood and people with life experience from different worlds, other than, I hate to use the term, the Canberra bubble, but other outside that sort of party apparatchiks in there?
So you're describing me. So I was not from the party apparatchik. I was brand new. I'd spent 20 years volunteering in my community for the homeless community, for our disabled community, and various other things. So I was a community advocate. I was sort of spotlighted on at one stage, and they welcomed me in when I went through my pre-selection. And this is why it doesn't work when you've got an outsider coming into those old boy structures, is that I was told by those men who had been around for far, far, far longer than I had, that I hadn't done my Labor Party apprenticeship, I hadn't served my time, and that I wouldn't be a good candidate for public office for that reason. So the undermining and the white-handing of me began before I even began. And then another old boy from that same club also held the view that because I was a single parent, that I wasn't going to be up to doing the job. So, we go right back to that very beginning place for me, and the example that I have just, explained. It is near virtually impossible. And that goes back to what Gough Whitlam said. I think it was an address for the AWU. And he said, if we don't start looking outside of ourselves, we're just going to continue to inbreed. And we do need some of those hacks in politics. Like, there is room for them, but there's also room for other people. And to his credit, I think at the last election, Shorten did specifically go and look for people who had a depth and a breadth of experience. Emma McBride, who's a pharmacist, Susan Templeman, who had a media background, Mike Freelander, who was a paediatric doctor, myself. There was a number of people that were elected in that 2016 election who didn't come from the typical entry into politics. And some of them fared very well. We lost 4 women at the last election because we are also given the marginal seats and the ones that are hard to retain, and therefore we can't develop that institutional knowledge. We can't develop those political games and understand the rules of the game that we're in, but we don't really know we're in a game until it's far, far, far too late. So there are a number of learnings, I think, to take away from that, but it all starts with an appetite, and the appetite's got to come from the top. And if the leader has no appetite to change this, then we'll be still here in 20 years from now, and my kids will be adults, and we will still be looking at the same rates of violence against us, the same rates of rapes against us, the same rates of women being murdered by their partners, because I think Turnbull famously remarked, you know, not all violence, you know, not all disrespect to women ends in violence, but all disrespect, all violence starts with disrespect. And unless we start to come, you know, to a reckoning as a country that we don't respect women equally, then we're not going to shift that. And that's going to take the men, unfortunately.
Well said. Certainly a lot of commentary in the chat saying, yes, we need more people in our parliament, and I would suggest at all levels of government with real life experience. I'll also say that, again, coming back to this independence conference that I attended last week, this isn't really by design. I think it's more just happened this way, but most of the groups, and I think there are now voices of and other type groups in about 16 or 17 electorates around the country, they're very women driven. Again, not necessarily by design, but I do think it's a sign that we're just basically saying we've had enough. Now, Tala, how are you going? How are the blueberries and the sushi going? We'd love to hear from you if you can.
I am here. Yes, I can't promise that he won't squeal at one point, but yes, I'm here.
He's agreeing with all of us, I'm quite sure.
He is. Yeah, exactly. That's where the squealing's coming from.
And just quickly, just saying, yes, the Voices of Groom is very women driven. So sorry, Tala, back to you. Just, you know, what do we need to see change? I know that you noticed a lot of the discussion that you've been getting from people as part of Women's Agenda.
Yeah.
Concern with events of last week. We're all about to march. What do we need to do to get more people to see what's going on, to put their head above the parapet a bit more?
I mean, I think everyone has raised some really important points, and I think, you know, Emma's experience firsthand, I completely empathise and understand why she doesn't feel like more women should put their hand up for a role in Parliament at the moment. But I can't help but feel that we do need to kind of break that open even more. And yes, you know, the Labor Party is at a kind of 50%. You know, we've reached gender equality there, but the Liberal Party is woefully behind, and I do feel that does play a pretty pivotal part in these issues constantly arising, and you know, the perpetuation of toxic culture. You know, if you don't have enough women there calling it out, and you know, women in the press gallery calling it out, and female politicians doing that, like Emma has so bravely done herself, you know, we're not going to see that change. And yes, it should absolutely not be on, you know, that impetus, that role shouldn't be on women, that responsibility shouldn't be on women, but it is. At the moment, we can see that is actually having, you know, quite significant influence, and maybe that is, you know, I feel like that's still a critical part of it, is just to really build towards equal representation. Yeah, I think that's it's really hard to say, isn't it? I do think that there's just a rampant boys culture on both sides. You know, a lot of our politicians are of the same mold as well. You know, we don't see a huge amount of diversity in there. They're typically kind of white males in their 50s, have gone through a certain, you know, education, have gone through the same universities. And so I think that's a part of it as well. You know, there's this culture of mateship and cover-ups and, you know, protecting each other that really needs to be actively dismantled. And so I think, yeah, you know, for me, I feel like equal representation will play a pretty vital role in doing that. But yeah, we do need to see more men willing to kind of shake their fist and be vocal on this issue as well. Absolutely. And again, please join these marches that are happening on March the 15th. Everyone, it's a very inclusive, peaceful, resolute have been the 3 words that I've been using. Again, lots of comments in the chat. John Neve actually makes the comment that we need to shut down private schools. I mean, that's certainly maybe less, co-ed schools. So not boys' schools, not girls' schools. We need more co-ed schools. Certainly, again, echoing what everyone's saying, we need more people in
all levels of government with more lived experience instead of coming up through the young Liberal, young Labor think tank sector, which seems, of course, to be common of late. I've also seen some commentary. In fact, Laura Tingle made this point the other night on a show with Philip Adams. Said a lot of the staffers now within the ministers and the members' offices have come through the political system instead of being in the public service. So that's also played a role into this culture that we're now seeing in our parliament, which has, of course, led to a lot of these issues. Thanks so much to everyone in the chat. Now, Evan, who's helping me in the back end, has sent me a message saying Sex Discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins will lead an independent inquiry into the culture of Parliament House. Is that's happened perhaps while I've been talking, Evan? I've known that there's numerous inquiries that are going on, but I've not seen anything actually assigned to Kate Jenkins. So that's breaking.
Just breaking news. So it came out 27 minutes ago. I was distracted and getting text alerts from my phone. And of course, I think the important thing that everybody needs to go away and remember is when the government, and this is, an insider's piece of information for you all, when the government or politicians go and announce that there's going to be an inquiry, it's usually to shut the media up. They then just deflect and go, oh, there's an inquiry afoot, we couldn't possibly comment. Do not let your rage go back to the simmering point, because what will happen is we'll have 3 months of hearings, and I am going to text Kate when I get off this this conference and say I'm happy to come first, and then we'll have this distraction of we've done something about it, we're looking like we're doing the right thing. They'll hand down a set of recommendations, and then it's completely voluntary whether those recommendations are instituted into that place or not. So I think that, don't be fooled by the, we're just going to cover our eyes and say that there's an inquiry and we're going to move on and give the government clean air. We need to stay focused and resolute in our absolute dismantling of the need to dismantle this system.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And yes, there has been a lot of commentary on Twitter this week saying, yes, it's awful to think how much of the information that we're seeing has been war roomed within various ministers and prime ministers' comms offices, which I think is just a dreadful reflection of the current state of our politics again. Let's move. It's 10 to 1, so we've been going for 50 minutes. Thank you, everyone, and thank you also for the wonderful chats. Bernadette Ryan in the chat is saying Kate Jenkins will also be on ABC Insiders. So watch out for that on Sunday. And please, again, if you're on Twitter, follow Ingrid on Twitter, who live tweets Insiders for us every Sunday and does a wonderful job just to give that perspective that we often don't get through Insiders. Let's move to final observations. Con, I'll come to you just for a final observation, something you wanted to raise and perhaps didn't get a chance to.
Look, I think, it's one of our great challenges, I think, at the moment is these broader themes around who's being left behind. Like, one of the things I've been thinking a lot on, like at the moment at my organization, we are dealing with a community of people seeking asylum that are in absolute crisis, from trying to figure out, how to house refugees who have spent the last 8 years locked up in detention centers, to how to provide even basic things like food security and support to people with nothing in one of the richest cities in the world here in Melbourne. And at the same time, I think about my work at the moment with First Nations communities. I think about my broader work around women's rights, and I look and go, we are a community in crisis right now. And I think there's a real challenge around how, as a civil society, do we stop working in our silos and do we start coming together around our shared common ground, which is we have a government that does not speak for the majority of us, doesn't speak for people of color, doesn't speak for women, doesn't speak for First Nations people, doesn't speak for the unemployed, the poor, the disabled, doesn't speak for the elderly. When look what we just did with the Royal Commission findings into aged care, like everyone's not even talking about it anymore. So we need to start thinking about it as a civil society. How do we start mobilizing and sharing our knowledge, our networks, our wisdom capital that we've got, and coming together to build a sustainable movement for change? We can't keep working. We're all, I've been working 30 years now in the community sector as a lawyer, as a social worker, as an advocate, and all around me, the best leaders are all burning out. Or they're doing what Emma's talking about. They're not wanting to go into politics because they're so disillusioned with the state of it. That can't be the future. We need to be giving young people the hope that they can be the leaders that change this community, but we need to start coming together. So I think the thing that really stands out for me is about how do we build these coalitions of hope and love and justice, and how do we start bringing together the fact that we're fighting the same fight, and between us, we have so much expertise, so much knowledge, and so much power if we start coming together and sharing it and amplifying each other. And I think that we're at a crossroads now about, are we going to come out of COVID a more just and equitable society, or are we going to have learned nothing and in fact come out a crueler society? And now's the time. It's time. So that's my final takeaway, and that's the challenge I set for all of us.
Well said, Con. There's a lot there. I agree. It feels like we're at a crossroads, and it's only us that can actually make things happen in the way that we want it to be that fair, equitable society that, I think we all want, and we all want not just for us, but for our kids and our grandkids. Carrick, let me come to you for a final observation.
Look, my final observation is pretty much formed in the last few minutes, just listening to all the other guests, just hearing Emma's experience and Tala and Con speaking. It really does sort of revealed itself to me that we need to change that monoculture down in Canberra. It seems to be just like a sausage making machine that is churning all these parliamentarians. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't preclude the fact that there can be some good parliamentarians. There can be good people that have come through this process, but it is a monoculture. And that is why it seems to be about 30 years behind the rest of society when it comes to simple things like sexual harassment. So what can we do to change that? If these political parties, major political parties, aren't going to change their pre-selection and they're going to keep churning out these people that have done their apprenticeships, then we have to vote independent. And I know that that's something that you're quite passionate about, Denise. We have to start acting and voting with our votes. And perhaps if eventually enough electorates start presenting, options that are independent thinkers and better reflect their constituents, then eventually the major parties will have to start reacting to that, and hopefully we can start seeing some change.
Well said. And yes, go the independents. After a lot of consideration, that's what I truly see as a positive path forward for us. Emma, I'll come to you for a final observation.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep kicking this down the road, Carrick, and say that the importance for publicly funded election and election candidates couldn't be any more important in this discussion. Having, fought 2 elections, I am well aware of the cost that was borne by the Labor Party. My experience there wasn't all terrible. I did learn a lot. I have taken away a lot of things from there, but it is incredibly expensive. So it closes our democracy again. It shrinks it down to that monoculture for who can afford to participate in this system, who can afford to then, basically sell their soul to a political party that is run by, and I think that you talked about the apprenticeships, the common term is hacks. And those people are the ones that last in the system because they've door knocked the doors as a 15-year-old in Young Labor. They've made the phone calls. They are owed favours. They've got dirt on somebody, and they're willing to wield that around as a power source. So publicly funding elections, I think, would also be something that the voting public wouldn't really understand the concept of why that is actually important. They just probably think of it as, oh, they just want to spend more of my taxpayer funds. But it is incredibly important for the arm of democracy to be able to be inclusive and to be able to be accessible. And I think that the last thing that I'll my only observation is that there needs to be a credible alternative. Like, we all hate the Morrison government. I didn't vote for them. I don't know that, I don't find anyone that's going to be willing to admit to that now, after we've just seen rort after rort, a $30 million payment for a $3 million piece of land, sports rorts, the absolute sexist and misogynistic culture, and the way we've protected an alleged rapist, the way that has been handled. So credible alternatives are really, really viable, and it's not just up to me or to the people who are there now. It's actually up to the people who cast their votes.
Well said. Tara, are you still with us? I can't see you on my screen. She may have been taken away. Evan, can you see, Evan who's helping me in the back end, Evan, can you see Tara anywhere? No, can't see her. We'll move on. I'll just give my quick final observation. We didn't mention the Aged Care Royal Commission. That feels a little bit remiss considering it's quite a big thing, but of course other events have taken this week. So I'll just, we'll mention that. I'll hope to get a guest maybe in a future live Zoom panel or a podcast to help us understand what's going on in our aged care system. But I will leave you with one word in regard to our aged care system: privatisation, which to me is just key to that. I just also wanted to speak about the vigil that I'm attending tonight in Sydney for the town hall for the Biawila family, or the Sri Lankan family that's currently on Christmas Island. I know, Con, you've had a bit to say about them this week. I think there's been a dusk service, or sorry, a dawn service this morning in Biawila, and there's dusk services around the country tonight. I'm attending the one at Town Hall, and I'll be live streaming that through my Twitter account. So if anyone wants to follow me there, please do so. That is to mark 3 years today since they were taken from their home in Biawila. Of course, now they're on Christmas Island. 2 daughters. It's not just the indefinite detention and the uncertainty in keeping them behind barbed wire. There's also the huge public expense that they're going to keep them there for really absolutely no reason. So I wanted to mention that as well. Of course, the march that's happening on March the 15th, we've mentioned that a couple of times. Please, there will be in your local cities. Canberra is the head march, and I'll also be live streaming from that, so please get involved. So in the meantime, I will say thank you so much to everyone who's joining us, our panellists, Tala Lambert from Women's Agenda, who had to leave us. The blueberries and the sushi obviously ran out. Con from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, thank you so much. Really appreciate your comments, and please, Con, keep doing what you're doing. Emma Hassar, thank you, and look forward to speaking with you in 2 weeks for our podcast. And Carrick Ryan also, and anyone who's on Facebook, please go and follow Carrick on Facebook. He's got such an involved audience.
Thank you so much for having us, Denise.
Oh, a pleasure. Thank you also to the audience, and a wonderful discussion there as well. Next Friday on the SpinProof Live podcast, I'm speaking with Kathy McGowan. She, of course, hosted the Getting Elected convention last weekend about those community-minded independents. And of course, I'll be hosting Emma in the SpinProof Live podcast in 2 weeks. We'll be back with another Zoom panel on the first Friday of April, but I think that's Easter Friday, so it will be the first Thursday of April, and I'll certainly let everyone know both on Facebook and on Twitter about the guests that will be joining us. But please also subscribe to Australia at Home, where you'll be getting the email updates. So in the meantime, I'll say all the best, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Hang in there. Hope to see a lot of you at the protest also in Canberra. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.